Hello and welcome to tonight's event, brought to you by Cardiff Book Festival in partnership with Pontypridd's newest independent bookshop, ARTtic. We've some early festive cheer in store for you in the form of Gary Raymond's new book, a scene-by-scene analysis of the Christmas film Love Actually. A bit of a spoiler for you here though, he's not a fan. But before we tuck into the mince pies and crack open the Baileys, I'd just like to say a big thank you on behalf of Cardiff Book Festival for joining us this evening. Like most organisations, this year has proved a challenge for us. So if you're able to, please donate to the festival so that we can continue to bring you bookish events. And of course, if you'd like to buy Gary's book, the details of how to do so will be on the screen. I'll now hand you over to Gary Raymond and to Carolyn Hitt, who's chairing this evening's event.
Hello everybody, I'm Carolyn Hitt. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this online event brought to you by the Cardiff Book Festival and to introduce you to writer and broadcaster Gary Raymond. Now Gary and I usually work together on the monthly review show on Radio Wales and we pick apart all sorts of cultural content. But tonight the focus is very much on Gary and his fabulous new book, How Love Actually Ruined Christmas. Now I hope you all got the memo about Christmas jumpers and that you're sitting at home, Christmas lights on, glass of eggnog to hand. Now, Gary is the author of 2 novels. He's got a third on the way, but in between those works of serious fiction, he's managed to squeeze out this wonderful book. I've got the uncorrected proof. The actual copies are available in the shops right now. And he mercilessly dissects the film that has been voted Britain's favourite Christmas film. And as we're going to hear, that's one vote where it really would be worth demanding a recount. Gary, welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction.
And no Christmas jumper, I see, but hey.
Oh no, this is as Christmassy as I get when talking about Love Actually.
Now, what is really impressive about this to start with is that, we've all been in lockdown, binging on Netflix and generally kind of lazing around, and you've devoted much of that time to producing this fabulous book, and you undertake a kind of minute scene-by-scene analysis of Love Actually. It's fantastic. How was this project conceived and how did you go about it?
Well, it was conceived probably years ago when I sort of got to the stage where I realized that that this kind of thing could work as a book. I mean, I've got to say from the start that I'm as surprised as anyone to find that this book has been written and been published, and that it is absolutely 100% my lockdown book, because it wouldn't have existed had it not been for the circumstances of lockdown and essentially sort of having the time to do it and having that kind of new area of focus that normally was taken up by like going from meeting to meeting or or being in those meetings, meetings that were essentially like afternoon coffee meetings where you knock ideas around have become 20-minute Zoom experiences. So lockdown, I know for a lot of people, opened up sort of more space really. So what kind of happened was, half drunk in July, I suggested to my publisher at Parthian, we were both half drunk by the way, which I suppose altogether combined makes for fully drunk.
Where all great books begin.
Where all great books begin, exactly. So I suggested to my publisher, Richard Davis, look, this could be a great opportunity to write that Love Actually book that I've been going on about for probably about 17 years. No, not quite that long. I said, I've got the time to do it. I can actually do it. I could sit in front of the film over the next few weeks and make some notes and see if the book is possible. Now, I should say that like the book is a sort of almost like a culmination of years and years of sitting around, not continuously, obviously, but years and years of sitting around normally whenever the film sort of crosses the desk, as it were, and moaning in the kitchen at parties or in the pub, taking the film to pieces. So in that sense, like my response to the book, my response to the film in the book is kind of an amalgamation of conversations I've had over the years and things that other people have brought up and mentioned that I've kind of co-opted as my own sort of responses. Really, I've absorbed many of other people's responses over time.
And on a practical level, it's July, not the most festive of times, and we have had quite a hot summer. You were kind of sitting there,
yeah,
day after day, I mean, did you allocate a day to a particular part of the film? Did you do chronologically? Did you look at themes? What was the kind of practical way you approached it?
Well, my original idea was to I should say that a long time ago the idea for this book came about from reading Jeff Dyer's really enjoyable but quite serious and intellectual book Zona, which is his kind of almost like watch along response to Tarkovsky's Stalker, which he thinks is, which I agree with him on, is one of the great sort of works of art of the 20th century. And I always had in the back of my mind this idea of what if I did that with a film I hated rather than a film I loved. I always sort of get good responses in my non-fiction from readers whenever I've had an opportunity to really rage about something. People seem to, not just me, but people really like reading, like, you know, raging works, I suppose. So the idea for the structure, the composition of the book was kind of seeded in that reading of Jeff Dyer's Zona, and later on his book about a lot more fun, his book about Where Eagles Dare, where he does the same thing. So my idea was, well, if I sit down with a notebook and just see if there is a book in here, see if I can make it funny, because it's supposed to be funny, it's supposed to be
very funny,
entertaining,
but it makes a lot of serious points as well. I mean, that's what's brilliant about it. You know, you use humor really well, but there are a lot of serious points to draw on there.
Well, I think that's kind of like, that's kind of what I'm like. I mean, I don't mean to sound like too sort of highfalutin about it, but I like to use humor to address things that I think are important, things that matter to me. I like to, you know, it can be quite dark humor sometimes. I think there's some dark humor in the book, but also, you know, I really revel in like the lowest forms of wit. So I think responding to a film as poorly made and as thematically offensive as Love Actually is, I think it was kind of made for me. So I kind of thought, well, I'm going to give it a go, and I attempted at first to sit down and watch the film, and I thought, well, if I watch it like every day for like 5 days and I make more and more notes and build it up, then I'll see what I've got at the end. But what actually happened was, about 10 minutes into the first screening, I realized that there's just no way on God's green earth I'm going to be able to sit through this film for five screenings. So what I ended up doing was for about 2 weeks, I'd get up at 5 in the morning, make myself a strong coffee, put the film on, and I'd get through about 10 minutes in about 2 hours with the pause button, making notes. And I just watched it once through. So that was the process of writing what is the central text of the book, which is the scene-by-scene analysis. So that's, you know, the bulk of the book. And then obviously that was augmented and built upon as I typed it up. And then I had a great editor at Parthian as well, David Cottis, who was, you know, really sort of invested in what the book was trying to do. And there are a lot of footnotes in the book. And I know when I sent it to David for the first time, you know, I was told he was going to be my editor, and I knew him anyway. He's a friend of mine, and I thought, oh, this will be really exciting. I thought, but I'm not sure about the footnotes. I can totally imagine the book coming back and going, this is great, but people don't really like reading footnotes outside of academia. But his first line of feedback in the entire editing process was, love the footnotes, we need more. So
yeah, I really appreciated them, and they weren't, you know, all tucked away right at the back where nobody ever looks at them. They're there as soon as you've read a reference or you've expressed something, you know, the link to it is directly under the page, and I think that works really well. Now, it's an interesting work to take on because it is a film that absolutely polarizes opinion, and it's a film we're really familiar with because it's on ITV2 practically every other week, you know, even in the summer. And I remember when the film was voted, I think it was 2016, it was voted Britain's favourite Christmas film by the readers of the Radio Times. And I was outraged by this and tweeted something to that effect. And a lot of people reacted as if I'd kind of slaughtered a litter of kittens, you know, because it is very well loved by some people and hated by others. And I must admit, when I saw it for the first time in the cinema back in 2003, I did find it entertaining. It was full of kind of attractive people in trendy houses, and it was very kind of shiny and metropolitan rom-com. But even then, there were some scenes that really, really jarred and disturbed me. But is it a case that, you know, this is the ultimate kind of hindsight book, that it is a film that's of its time, that kind of Blairite, hopeful, cool Britannia era, and actually, you know, it doesn't kind of match our modern, well, our current kind of more cynical frame of mind?
Well, I think you make a really good point. That is it just that the film is dated? As essentially, I suppose, is the question you're asking. And I think there are two ways to look at that. You can look at Richard Curtis's wider work, and I've got nothing against Richard Curtis. I got nothing against his work. I've enjoyed others of his films, although quite a few of them are just as bad as Love Actually mine. But that's nothing personal. That's just, I am a critic, and that's how I'm my job is to sort of judge things like that. So I suppose so the one comparison I'd make is he wrote the treatment, the story for the adaptation of Bridget Jones. Now, when you watch the first one, Bridget Jones's Diary, which I saw accidentally quite recently, not long before I started writing this book, because it was on probably ITV2. Watching it again, it was dated, but it still kind of works because it's a film that has something to say about the way that men treat women in the workplace, and and so those things, the things that it has to say, might not be very modern and up to date. I mean, it's still quite a funny film with some winning performances, but that just shows that it's dated. So you can if you want to, you can park elements of Bridget Jones's Diary and still enjoy it. You can go, well, yeah, that's what it was like in 1999 or whenever it was.
Yeah, the thing that's really dated with that film is just that everybody's smoking, but there's still lots to take from, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I don't think there's any questions in that film, in Bridget Jones, about, for instance, like the power dynamic in the workplace. There's no questions about that. Whereas you look at it now and go, well, this is all a little bit kind of not quite on, really. So you can look at it like that. But the one marker I put against Love Actually is that all of the worst things about that film, like morally and ethically, the worst things about that film are the things that are retained for the comic relief sequel that was made in 2017. So if you I don't think, I think if the thing that's dated, if you like, was potentially our initial response to it. I remember hating the film when it came out, but I don't specifically remember. I'm not pretending to be like way beyond as a man. I'm not pretending to be way beyond my peers in our sort of emotional growth or anything. I was 22, 23 or whatever when it came out. I don't think I was hating it because I found it misogynistic or because it was homophobic or any of those things. I hated it because I just thought it was a bad film, and probably schmaltzy, yeah, and probably because I felt a lot of the jokes were unkind, and I've never really been into humor that punches down, as it's referred to nowadays. Which almost all of the humor in Love Actually does punch down. It doesn't have very much interest in punching up, really, apart from maybe there's a little moment where they take the piss out of Margaret Thatcher, but is it really? I don't really know, that sort of thing. But I would say that I know people I've talked to during the creation of this book who hated the film immediately in 2003, and they hated it for those reasons. Predominantly women friends of mine who hated it immediately. But again, I know people who are friends of mine who I mentioned this in the book, friends of mine who are even much more engaged with social issues and equality issues and things like that than me, who have been aghast that I've attacked this film in print. So it's the thing that drew me to the subject and has always tempted me, and then I had this opportunity to actually do it, an opportunity I never really seriously thought would come up. The thing that really attracted me to it is why. That's why the second title, the subtitle, is Colourful Narcotics, because I think it's a film that kind of sort of woozes people, that drugs them into thinking that it's a good film when in fact it's a terrible film. And people that I know and love and respect, and people who I go to for guidance in social justice issues and moral issues and equality issues, who I look to for guidance in those things in my own sort of personal growth, have just looked at me and gone, do not spoil this movie for me. Do not ruin this movie. So it's got this very strange hold over people.
You've not ruined it though, because you've just made you'll make people think differently about it. And I think, you know, it's the same with any kind of ubiquitous film. I think of something like The Sound of Music, which I've probably seen 100 times, and as a kid I was mesmerized by the, you know, the kind of just the children in it, and you take something out as you grow, and now I look at it and I feel really sorry for the Baroness, you know, because he's just dumped her before he moves Maria in, you know, kind of simultaneously. And when I read your book, there were elements of it that I already really related to, and we'll come on to the kind of many layers of misogyny later. But I particularly was taken by the way you analysed the Liam Neeson storyline of bereavement and grief, and the young stepson, and the fact that the Emma Thompson character Karen is his best friend, you know, ostensibly counselling him. And actually, when I read your kind of analysis of it, it is just outrageous how those themes are treated, in terms of, you know, a boy who's lost his mum, a guy who doesn't even, you know, we don't even hear the name of the dead wife that he's grieving, and Emma Thompson, who we all warm to when she's weeping away to Joni Mitchell. You know, she has no empathy herself in those scenes, and it is quite astonishing. And that's the one scene one plot you really maybe look at afresh.
Well, that's the one strand that I haven't had to have any growth on. I've always found, I know from the first time of watching that film whenever I first saw it, I didn't see it in the cinema, so whenever I saw it when I had the opportunity to see it for the first time, that was the one strand that always struck me as something that I couldn't understand why people were thinking it was cute or warm or anything. I found it really dark and really damaged, and I come from a perfectly nice, normal, healthy family background, I could never understand how anybody could think that the way Liam Neeson deals with the grief of his stepson is in any way warm or to be encouraged, or more importantly, because you have to remember Love Actually is a comedy, and there are different rules for comedies as there are for other films that deal with heavy subjects, in that if you're writing a comedy, if you're marketing something that's a comedy, you have a responsibility to jokes, right? You've got responsibility to make people laugh. So there are certain things you might be able to get away with in a really difficult dynamic, as in, you know, a family in grief, or in this case, a husband whose wife dies and he is left with his stepson to bring up, to all intents and purposes. So that's, but a really skillful writer who was invested in that dynamic could find really humorous things to write about in there, and could bring out really sort of emotional, sensitive elements, but also find genuinely funny things to write about. But as I keep coming back to on that strand, it's like, just for instance, the way Liam Neeson talks to Sam, and
it's really inappropriate, isn't it? He's 11-year-old kid.
Massively inappropriate, yeah. And it seems to have something to do with the fact that that in Richard Curtis's world, and I've got nothing against this, but having really upwardly mobile, posh British people swearing is the funniest thing that he can think of. I mean, you see it in the opening scene of Four Weddings and a Funeral, and that kind of works but that works this is going off in a tangent, but that works in a context, because up until that point, I don't think Hugh Grant had ever sworn on screen. So the reason why the swearing works in Love Actually, I remember when it came out in the mid-90s. I mean, I was still in school, but I remember when it came out, and the talk was about, have you seen that opening sequence? Mm-hmm. But then putting that kind of language into the mouth of Liam Neeson, who, of course, not at the time, but now we know as the man who, with a specific set of skills, who goes around smashing Russian people through windows. It seems very strangely aggressive to an 11-year-old boy who's just lost his mother. But there are so many things wrong with it. The fact that he's, Liam Neeson is so encouraging, and talks to the boy as if he's like a peer rather than a child, and the way that he's so encouraging of pushing. There isn't of pushing Sam, the little boy, towards this girl he's got a crush on in school, and not at any point does there seem to be a moment where there is any recognition that Sam might be grieving, and that there might be something worth talking about in the context of grief,
And
rather
then Emma Thompson comes in, puts the tin hat in it by basically saying, "Man up."
well, Emma Thompson's character, and I've had more fallings out about this than any other character in the film. I think Emma Thompson's character is absolutely appalling throughout the film. I mean, you know, fair dues to Emma Thompson, who obviously is a goddess, I should say, or a god. I don't know. She's impressive. She's great. Her character, you know, she brings a real sort of humanity to a character who is deeply unpleasant on almost every level, in every scene, with the possible exception of the moment where she cries to the Joni Mitchell record, that famous scene. But I also, in the context of the film as a whole, I have a problem with the interpretation of that scene as well, really, which I go into in the book. But yeah, Emma Thompson's character, who turns to Liam Neeson, who has, I mean, the structure of the film is a mess, so you never really know what day of the week it is. But this is all supposed to take place, you know, obviously in December, isn't it? Because it's, you know, it's blocked out to 5, 4, 3, 2 weeks before Christmas. But he's just buried his wife, and Emma Thompson's advice to him is to stop crying, because I think her very words are, "Nobody wants to sleep with a sissy."
That's it. Yeah.
I mean, that obviously sat around the table and the read-through, obviously people thought that was hilarious, but you can say that for many of the misfiring, horrible jokes in this film. To be a mum,
the fat jokes are a massive theme, and what Richard Curtis's obsession with and it's not even obesity. These people aren't even, you know, noticeably overweight.
It's
Martine McCutcheon's character is defined constantly by her weight. There's the sister of Colin Firth's silent housemaid, Miss Dunkin' Donuts.
That's it.
Or whatever the tag is. You know, so along with, you know, kind of subtle misogyny, there's absolute in-your-face misogyny, isn't there? Throughout these depictions.
And I think it's interesting as well that Curtis likes to get women like slagging each other off in the film. It's really the only time they talk about each other is when they're slagging each other off. So you have the one character, I forget the name, which character it is now, or the name of the actor, but you have one character who works in number 10, and the only time
yeah, she says, "Oh, a little bit chubby" or something, she says, isn't she?
So Hugh Grant says in reference to Martine McCutcheon, she goes, "Do you mean the chubby one?" So and then, you know, all of that Dunkin' Donuts stuff, you know, about Colin Firth's love interest sister, those references are all sort of within the family, and the mother says it, and you know, it's I get the feeling that that it's not the fat jokes. This may be a slight disclaimer in Richard Curtis's favour, although it's very slight. But I get the feeling when I watch the film that the fat jokes are not coming from a place of misogyny. They're coming from a place of bad writing and lazy comedy. And that the whole film, if you judge it in terms of comedy, feels very low energy, feels very lazy, and it feels like a film that's kind of been cobbled together from bits of better films that he's already made. I mean, you know, even the choice of "Love Is All Around" as the theme tune for it, Richard Curtis has said openly, you know, in interviews, that they had other songs ready to go, but they just thought, well, you know, the Wet, Wet, Wet version from Four Weddings and a Funeral was number 1 for 150 weeks or whatever it was. Why don't we just use that one again? So, you know, it's so low on ideas. And if you pick apart the comedy of it, the comedy is very lazy, very lowest common denominator. And although there's no denying the misogyny of the strand of fat shaming that goes through the film, I don't really feel it comes from a place. I don't get the feeling that those jokes are coming from a writer who hates women and wants to fat shame them. I think it's because it's lazy, it's low energy, it's lacking in ideas.
Is it a writer, though, who just doesn't understand women? You think it's the way the male characters approach the women, and even though they're supposed to be in lust or in love with them, they barely speak to them, most of them. You think of Hunky Carl. I mean, does Carl ever say anything to Laura Linney's And she's, you know, and she is one of the most appealing characters in the film, isn't she? Or, you know, young Sam never gets to really express how he feels to his kind of junior love interest, apart from playing the drums or whatever. And then Andrew Lincoln just turns up with a pile of flashcards, and that again, you know, that, I mean, that is one of the people talk about, you know, iconic scenes, don't they, whenever they talk about films, and that's so kind of embedded in British popular culture that Boris Johnson even parodied it, didn't he, for last Christmas for Tory political broadcast. You know, there's almost a kind of affection towards the scene, and yet he's just a stalker. She's newly married and is kind of coquettishly going along with it, and you just think, this is just such a bizarre setup. And
I think the as far as reappraisals of Love Actually go, I think the earliest reappraisal, the most commented on when I was researching and reading like old articles and reviews, but particularly like online blogs and magazine articles and things, were in reference to that scene, and how could anybody like even create that scene and imagine that it was anything other than inappropriate, that Andrew Lincoln's character is strangely wooing the new wife of his so-called best friend. There's just a horrible connection between Chiwetel Ejiofor's Peter and Andrew Lincoln's Mark, the kind of connection that I've, you know, seen and experienced a million times through, you know, people I've known, that kind of really you know, unedifying like male connection, where just, you know, women are kind of pieces of meat on the periphery, really, which is what Kieran Knightley is. Kieran Knightley's coming for quite a bit of stick over the years for her performance and his sort of goody two-shoes sort of thing, which I think is completely unfair.
She's so young. I didn't realise actually how young she was when she made that film.
She's so young. And of course, the interesting thing is something that came up a number of times, is that when that film was made, she is actually like 4 years older than Sam, the actor who plays Sam. So they're actually like closer in age, if there was going to be any sort of frisson going on, than her and Andrew Lincoln. But yeah, I mean, his sort of, you know, that it does sort of typify the attitude of the film to women, you know, that kind, because there's so much in that scene with the flashcards where it's so jumbled up ethically and morally in what is trying to be achieved in the name of humor, but also Christmas schmaltz. And obviously it achieves both of those things on a certain level because it's become an iconic scene. But when you don't even have to analyze it that closely. When you just pay attention to it, you see that not only is he stalking the new young wife of his best friend, but also in Curtis, when trying to make him not repulsive, wants to give the character, Andrew Lincoln's character, an out. So he's not. So he decides he's not trying to have an affair, Andrew, but he just has to tell the truth. And there's some kind of purification in process, some kind of purification obtainable by just saying the truth and telling her how he feels. But while he does that, in the flashcards, he explains that she doesn't really have to worry about the fact that he's in love with her, because by this time next year, he'll be having sex with a supermodel.
The supermodels are back.
The supermodels are back, yeah.
The most excruciating plot line, or there's two actually for me, which were also obvious from the very start. The porn stand-ins, Joanna Page and Martin Freeman. I remember because I had friends at the time wondering whether they could take their kids to this film because it was a 12 certificate. And I came back and said, well, I wouldn't, having seen that scene for a start. Mm-hmm. And then Colin, gormless Colin, the waiter turned, you know, I mean, that was on a level of, well, Confessions of a Window Cleaner type comedy, and just absolutely toe-curling at the time, let alone now.
Yeah, they're two really interesting strands that you bring up, I think, actually, because there were entire strands that were left on the cutting room floor in the edit because the film was too long, and yet for some reason at 2 hours and 10 minutes Richard Curtis still felt that the Martin Freeman, Joanna Page strand had a place in the film, where it doesn't. I mean, those characters do not fit into any other strand, apart from they're kind of shoehorned in. So you see them at the Christmas concert at the end, and they're connected to somebody at the wedding. You know, there's little things like that which don't matter. You know, they're not important. And it's just strange. It makes no sense. I've read an interview with Richard Curtis where he explains that the idea for that pornographic strand is that it was supposed to be a European art house movie based on Don't Look Now, right? Now, Don't Look Now, of course, not only being a classic 70s movie, a classic horror movie, or regarded as a horror movie based on the Daphne du Maurier short story, was most famous in its day for the rumor that the sex scene in it between Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland was unsimulated, was an actual sex scene, because it, you know, I mean, it looks tame by today's standards, but in 1974 or whatever it was, it came out. It was very sort of graphic, and not graphic, but revealing. You know, it was very realistic. So obviously, maybe there's something in Richard Curtis's mind that was like, well, that can be the film. That can be the film that I'm basing this strand, or why this strand needs to exist. I have no idea. It's all very strange, but there's no reason for it other than some kind of weird puerile, you know, teenage titillation of just being able to have some boobs on screen. I mean, there's a fascination with boobs as well, which, you know, takes you back to that kind of Confessions of a Window Cleaner aesthetic. There are a lot of the art gallery in which a few scenes take place have, you know, large.
Oh yeah, I've forgotten that. Yeah.
Yeah, they have kind of large graphic images,
yeah,
which are supposed to be funny. But again, if you watch some of the deleted scenes, there's a lot more of an emphasis on that artwork. You know, it turning up, and there's scenes cut in which you see more of the artwork, which to an extent extends the joke a little bit, but also the joke isn't funny to begin with, so it doesn't really work on that level either. There is something about things that don't work in the film that when you look into it, when you explore and investigate and research a little bit, you see that some of the things that don't work because they decided in the edit that they weren't going to go in that direction. So
we're talking about the angel here, character.
That's the most prominent example, and I think bringing in a fantastical element to the film could have completely changed the way you look at everything. So the bit you refer to is Rowan Atkinson's character, a very famous scene where he very slowly packs the gift that Alan Rickman is buying for his secretary that he's intent on having an affair with. And he's packing it so slowly as Alan Rickman's wife, Emma Thompson, is doing shopping elsewhere. And there's this like whole, like, you know, Monsieur Hulot's holiday sort of slapstick sort of Chaplin-esque sort of thing that Atkinson does so well. But the original take was that Rowan Atkinson's character was an angel who'd come down at Christmas time to make sure that, you know, to make sure that Christmas is a wonderful time and people don't make mistakes like Alan Rickman is about to do by buying that gift. But they decided to cut that in the edit. So there are scenes where that clearly suggest that Rowan Atkinson is an angel. Rowan Atkinson's character, Rufus, is an angel. So they decided to take all of that out. And I think that the way you could play with the film in your own mind, if there was a clear fantastical element, I think would possibly let the film off the hook in terms of the way it fails as a piece of work. I mean, nothing can escape the fact that it's offensive thematically.
But why do people love it so much? Because there are people who absolutely love this film. What is it about? Colourful Narcotics are back to again, I suppose, aren't we? You know, why has it got this hold on so many people? Because it is, and people will watch it again and again. It's one of those films that's on constantly, and people will sit down and watch constantly as well.
There are lots of things that I admire and enjoy that have problematic elements. You know, books from the 50s, films from the 60s, TV programs from the 70s, you know, whatever. There are things that that are problematic because of the social politics of the time in which they were made. And on the most part, I can pause that element and continue to admire and enjoy the aspects that work, that are timeless, if you like, rather than dated. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know how people do that with this film. The one sort of ambition of the book from the outset, I suppose, was to answer that question, and I'm not sure if I did. At the outset, it was: is this film as bad as I think it is? If I really examine it, if I really give it my attention, my undivided attention, will I find that it could be one of those things? It could be something where it's dated, and if you put on hold the dated elements, like you can do with something like Bridget Jones's Diary, you can continue to enjoy the elements that exist that are timeless. But what I found was that I couldn't.
Because it is part of people's Christmas routine in a way, isn't it? It's all there in the background. It's part of the kind of tradition.
But it's important to say, I think, that the book I've written is not an attack on.
No, and I
not,
really want to stress that. And, I think we can kind of round off our chat, Gary, perhaps with a little excerpt to give people a sense of your approach and your tone, because I think this book will be loved as much by people who love the film as who hate it, because
I hope so. Yeah.
Because it goes into the kind of detail that a true film fan does, and it will make people, think afresh, or it'll completely confirm what they've always thought. So let's have an excerpt.
Okay, so in other words, what you're saying, Carolyn, is that there's no reason why you shouldn't buy the book.
Oh, absolutely no. I'm buying this for my Love Actually loving friends, and my hating friends as well.
Excellent. Good. Right. Well, I'm going to read a bit of the commentary, in fact, that I think sets up the film quite well, or a certain reading of the film that I have quite well, and also sets up some of the book to follow. So this is the response to essentially the opening narrative scene. So we've had an intro and a montage at the beginning, and that weird kind of Shakespearean prologue. So this is the film where the camera comes up, and Bill Nighy's Billy Mack is recording the song "Love Is All Around," which is remade as "Christmas Is All Around." When we fade up to the concentrating face of Bill Nighy, one of many British national treasures, who over the next 2 hours and 10 minutes will turn their considerable skills to the efforts of encouraging me to eat my own face. Love Actually is a film we all know that many people love. But to those who hate it, those who feel it is perhaps one of the most significant low points in humankind's gleeful race to the bottom, often speak of the bits in it that they enjoy. Most people who hate Love Actually offer up one character, one scene that they like. It goes something like this. Yes, Love Actually is abhorrent, offensive, stupid, lazy, but Bill Nighy is good. I am here to tell you, reader, that the case for Nighy is likely to be the most compelling evidence for the conspiracy theory that some national hypnosis has been in operation when it comes to this film. A trick played by the devil, evidence of the effect of these colourful narcotics. Nighy is here to enact part 2 of the opening salvo of Love Actually after PM Hugh Grant has told us what to expect, that this is going to be uplifting, that it will be about all the forms of love that there is in this hill of beans of a world, and that the world is a good place peopled with good peoples, and even as the Twin Towers came down, all that could be heard for miles around was not the screams of thousands mixed with the hellish crunch of twisting metal, but was the ethereal, Eno-laced sentiment that love actually is all around. Yes, here comes Nighy singing your Christmas #1 for 2003, a smooth candy pop version of the Wet, 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 doing a smooth, glitzy version of the Trogs song that isn't Wild Thing. Nighy seems to be channeling Keith Richards just a little, and so much so he's very old, drug-battered, and cannot sing a note. but is Billy Mack, who sounds more like a Viz character who goes around wanking into other people's Happy Meals than an aging national treasure rock star, is only slightly an homage to Johnny Depp, gurning his way through 57 through 57 Pirates of the Caribbean movies as Keith Richards. You have to admit there is more to Mac than Jack Sparrow. Billy records from a seated position on a stool. This may explain why his vocal is so short on breath, but he has some energy and he shows when he does a little dance, swinging his arms and pouting like an old street drunk who's just been woken up by a road sweeper, only the top half of him apparently being able to really get into the groove. The track is cut short. Billy has got the words wrong. This is a novelty record and the lyrics have been rewritten to cast a wink at the Christmas market. This is to be a reimagining. Rabsy Nesbitt is in the production booth, scrubbed up from his string vest into a fetching double denim. He already looks frustrated, tired, his mind half on going back to the concrete benches around the back of Woolworths with a plastic bag full of McEwen's Extra. Billy is a maverick, you see, the type of maverick we're supposed to find charming, the type who is feckless and lazy and supremely entitled, the type who walks around thinking all lobbies of 4-star hotels are decorated with the tufts of torn-out hair of personal assistants. Billy may not be wanking into your quarter pounder, but he's definitely a wanker. It's difficult to describe how much this post-prologue scene makes me feel nauseous. For a start, I know that hell is to come, and that we have still so far to go. But also it's the half-hearted confidence of the whole thing. The fact everybody involved in the film knows this is going to be huge and they really don't have to work too hard at it. Rabsy Nesbitt's little jiggle is presumably supposed to be funny because overweight men doing slightly effeminate hip wiggle is funny. Bill Nighy can't be asked to stand up from his stool. The song they are recording, Love Is All Around, is a decent hippie ballad, made sickeningly schmaltzy by Marty Pello's goateed smirk for Richard Curtis's previous behemoth, 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Curtis couldn't even be bothered to find a different song. It's a regurgitation, a lazy, sleek turd of a song. And it drives a direct line between that dreadful recording and this dreadful movie. If you ever wondered what soulless bastards buy Wet, Wet, Wet singles, now you know, the people who went on to make Love Actually. But then something miraculous happens. Meta does what Meta does. And there is the smallest hint that this whole film is a joke. And the joke is on the viewer. The joke is on us. All of a sudden, I'm interested. Billy Mack, singing the shit lyrics adapted from the originally slightly less shit lyrics, looks almost straight into the camera and stops and says, "This is shit." In the control booth, Rabsy Nesbitt looks almost right into the camera too and says in a thick Scottish brogue, "That's right, solid gold shit." Can it be he doesn't mean only the song? Can it be he means the entire film? The only sentence of sense in the entire movie, and it comes, of course, from the Glaswegian homeless drunk, as if he has gate-crashed this Notting Hill nightmare to speak truth to power. There is hope for us yet.
Solid gold shit. That perfectly encapsulates the paradox that is Love Actually. Gary, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to give us the background on this great new book. Thank you to Cardiff Matthias for organising this with the Cardiff Book Festival. It's great to have this going on online this year. And everybody at home who's joined us tonight, thanks for your company. How Love Actually Ruined Christmas is published now by Parthian Books, just £10. Do buy your copy at an independent Welsh bookshop if you can, support the industry. And whether you actually love or actually hate Love Actually, this is the perfect stocking filler. Goodbye from us both.